All right, I think we're at time. Let's get started. So thank you for taking time. I know there's a lot of options out there this week. Hopefully you're having a great reInvent. My name's Chris Wegman, Senior Managing Director with Accenture. I'm super excited today to share a story about Connect in financial services. Unfortunately, our client was unable to make it today, so you get the three of us. We're going to take you through the journey that this very large bank here in North America went through on their Connect customer engagement journey over the last couple of years. So, you know, when this bank started off, right, we really looked at kind of three things, right? What was the challenge they're trying to solve? Identifying the solution. So we're going to take you through that challenge, through that solution, and talk about the approach they took. So I'm super excited. I've got two of the people that worked every day on this project. Brett, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice to see everybody here. Brett Stahura. I'm a managing director with Accenture. I'm part of our song practice. I can assure you there's no musical component to anything I'm going to share today, but that really just means I'm focused on customer experience and very excited to tell this story with you all.
I expect you to sing.
Yeah,
Karaoke.
exactly.
Hey everybody, I'm Andrew Sitzma. I was the delivery lead for the digital virtual assistant and the chat channel on this initiative. So really excited to be here sharing you like what we were able to package together with all the AWS services. And at some point I'm going to leap out of my seat and start pointing at the architecture over here. So
I don't know why they had seats, right?
Yeah,
This is too cool to just sit seated. So we'll definitely leave time at the end for questions. So if you got questions, please think about them. We'll get a mic out to you. So I'm going to start a little bit with the challenge, right? A large U.S. bank engaged in a merger, bringing a couple banks together. And as part of that, they need to bring their call center together, right? Pretty straightforward. So many of you guys have been in this situation. Call center needs to come together. What the real challenge was, as part of the business case for the merger, it was about bringing also new capabilities, new channels to market as part of this. They want to be an innovative bank, not just two or three banks coming together. So, you know, a big part of it was, okay, how do we make this work? How do we bring the banks together? How do we improve experience as part of it? So maybe I'll start with you guys. You guys were there. Talk a little bit about how you guys identified the solution and really got to how to go about this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we'll get into the kind of the overall timeline on the project and talk a little bit more about some of the details and show you a little bit of the trajectory. But the four questions that we've got here: are we going to build a platform? Are we just going to look at aggregating services? What technology do we use? Spoiler alert, we're all sitting in this room. So there was a strategic decision to use AWS, but then how do we get comfortable on that technology? And how do we build it in a way that we can iterate? Because Chris talked about the challenge with the merger, absolutely. The other thing is, and they recognized this early, how are we going to get off of our legacy platform, which is, it's not unique to them. Certainly we see this with a lot of our clients, but it was an aging platform that they were on previously. It was difficult to maintain. The speed to innovation was, multiple months. They knew that was too slow. So a lot of the things that we talked about early on in the program were really not just about the selection of the platform and the technology, but also how do we implement at a pace that's comfortable with the aging population, not going to disrupt your clients, but also going to allow you to be more nimble in the way that you innovate.
yeah, and the big thing too was it was a paradigm shift, right? Because when you look at these legacy contact center platforms, you've got legacy engineers, and it was a big change in just mindset and how they move forward in like their day-to-day work, and transitioning from like a platform engineer to an AWS developer, like in leveraging all the services and solutions that was out there. And that was where one thing we were able to help them in identifying the solution moving forward is like, hey, we can show you how you need to operate and who you need to be when you leverage this platform.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about these four a little bit more in detail here. So, I think I've seen in the call center space, especially with Connect, right? Everyone, the first thing everyone says, well, I'm just going to swap out Avaya. I'm just to swap out Genesys with Connect. How did they come to a decision that instead of just doing that, I'm going to build a platform? A couple things.
I mean, it was iterative. I mean, it wasn't. I wouldn't say that there was kind of one tipping point, honestly, Chris, that comes to my mind. More, I think they stepped back and looked at what are the capabilities that we have? What's going to give us the easiest transition in terms of where we want to go and where we are? And then I think there was a lot that we actually brought around some of the comparisons between the platforms that spoke to where to look for their specific ecosystem. So there was a lot of conversation early on about ecosystem comparisons, obviously. We arrived at AWS as a result of both some of the features that were native, some of the things that they were comfortable with, that they wanted to get to market quickly, but then also kind of the speed with which we thought we could do that. And I'll talk here in a minute about some of the innovation lab and things that we had set up to kind of enable that conversation to have a little bit more teeth than just hypothetical.
And it was a little bit of seeing is believing too, right? And starting small, proof of concepts. The timing of this too, I know we'll get to the timeline in a minute, but like Amazon Connect was still kind of making its inroads in the financial services space. So it was a bit of they had to experience it, see it, and then know like we could help them show that the capability of it and what the potential was, especially around the being scalable in the future.
So I see a lot of my customers do an RFP, an RFI. Did they do anything like that?
They did not issue an RFP for the platform selection. They handled it as I'll say it was internally with advisors who were already on the ground. They're partners that were on the ground. So Accenture was obviously a part of that. They had other providers that they were listening to at the time. Our perspective was really shaped a lot by the work that we had been doing in the space already, and some of the conversations that our conversations, frankly, about Connect, even in the nascent form originally, were kind of thorough and repeatable because of the way that we recognized how it would integrate into their specific environment. So it was acknowledging and offering our point of view without issuing the RFP that we do see a lot of now.
Cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you get comfortable here as we go forward. So, this is the program timeline. Take us through the program.
I think one of the things that I want to highlight immediately, and I've hit on it a couple of times here, is this was not a big bang, right? I mean, the idea of this was, well thought out, but also took time to really germinate. And it took time both on the technology side and with the line of business. And what you'll see, actually going all the way back to 2019 there, and hopefully you guys have binoculars, I don't know how big it is over there, but one of the things that we started with was an innovation lab idea. So Accenture historically for this client specifically owned the CRM work. We developed in Salesforce. We had a robust team on the ground working across the consumer bank. And we had a lot of conversations in that realm about innovation and client experience and how can you leverage your platforms to enhance what you're doing for your customers today. Knowing your customers, how do you identify them? What are some of the capabilities that are coming to market? And so rather than sitting back and looking at this as a PowerPoint presentation or here's the art of the possible, what we did was basically say, here are a couple of individuals that are going to come and sit on the ground. We're going to look at this, we're going to integrate some of these platforms together and show you how this thing will actually operate in your own environment. We took lines of business that were somewhat isolated, lower agents, lower contact volumes within the bank itself, within the consumer bank itself, and we proved it out. And we used that innovation lab idea to then gain some momentum. And you can see on the voice side specifically, we identified the problem early on. We used that innovation lab idea to really start to gain momentum and have something to go showcase both to the team that was intimately involved ultimately on the client side in delivering this, but also to the executive team that needed to see something tangible before they would sign off on a wholesale migration. Now, the voice side is kind of dominated there on between 2020, 2021, early 2022. Obviously, there's some sluggishness that was introduced with COVID. COVID also introduced some opportunities, right? I mean, one of the things I said was about the innovation that we enabled with Connect. If you think about, the mortgage experience, right, when COVID came out, you can see one of those mileposts there. People were sitting in a queue for 8, 9, 10 hours or more. I mean, it's a story that I'm certain most of you, all of you have read about. One of the things that we recognized immediately with Connect is that we could flip that team over to Connect and enable callback features so that instead of sitting on the phone for 8 hours waiting for a status update, you can go get a callback, right? So you're not sitting on the phone. It's that type of feature, it's that type of customer engagement that really started to turn the tide for us, and then you could see the bubbles start, gaining momentum on the voice side. And then in parallel, Andrew, you can talk about it. In 2021, we really recognized that not just voice, but really messaging was going to come into the fold as well.
Yeah, and that's the story you've told is how it goes for a lot of our clients, where there's a big focus on the voice side of things, because that's where the majority of the operations are, and the selection was made for Amazon Connect, and then the bank had the decision to say, okay, now that we've picked Connect and we know that it's an omni-channel platform because it can do more than just voice, it's like, let's start activating our omni-channel strategy into text-based servicing, which they called messaging. And even though it had been a journey with voice and kind of seeing and believing and growing, we needed to move fast on the messaging side. And so once Amazon Connect was selected, then we said, okay, great, like we want to get by Q1 of 2022, we want a virtual assistant out there that's more sophisticated and more engaging with our clients than what we have today with some really simple chatbots on their existing platform. So, from activating in August to March, we went and deployed Lex and built intents and interactions in Lex to land on top of the existing architecture and deliver on that, like, hey, let's get a virtual assistant out there that's engaging, first with employees, and then throughout 2022, rolling out to additional customers, additional features, additional intents. And then when that was going on, okay, now let's reconcile the architecture and let's get everything unified on AWS. And so then we took that, stood up another team and moved quickly to replace all those bits of the architecture from the old platform with Amazon services. And it was a lot, right? Like the first one was just a Lex deployment with what are the service intents we need to provide. And then this one was like, well, now we have front-end integrations we need to deal with. We have authentication we need to manage. And then we have the agent experience that ultimately was decided to integrate Connect into Salesforce. So it was the whole architecture then needed to shift over. And we were able to do that with Connect and the Amazon services. So it was great. It now has them on that solution, and I think we'll talk about some of the other benefits later on.
Yeah, we'll definitely go through the architecture here in another slide, but talk a little bit about the capabilities that were developed, right? So, digital deflection and some of that stuff. Talk about the capabilities now that the bank has based on this, both the voice and messaging platform.
Yeah, I'll start with messaging, because where we started in the beginning was just, hey, let's pick a few high interaction or high volume intents that we know we can handle that didn't need a lot of integrations, and then also work on a lot of navigating and wayfinding on the website. A lot of often low-hanging fruit that you do with a virtual assistant for the first time, but then it rapidly grew into saying, okay, how can we get to more sophisticated transactions, right? Like handling people's account balances, being able to get more into, locking and unlocking a credit card, ordering checks. Surprisingly, like a very old school product was best managed through the virtual assistant. And so that was kind of the journey we went on. And now we're to the point where we've kind of hit all the basic transacting things we'd expect from servicing, and now it's like, okay, what are the analytics we can deploy to start really looking at what are the not so obvious intents and interactions we need to start thinking about from a service perspective.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to some of the other capabilities too, but from a voice side, I think a lot of it was standardization. It was figuring out what capabilities we could introduce, NLP, for example. And there was a lot, I think, that we kind of helped them architect initially that now they're gaining momentum on the rest of the innovation story, right? So now, I don't think we can have any of these sessions without talking about Gen AI, but some of the learning and capabilities you can build in Wisdom, as an example, all of these things are on the table because of how we kind of architected up front to build out the integration, especially between, I think, voice and messaging.
Yeah.
So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this slide. So let's jump back to the voice. I really appreciate, a lot of time went in up front to make sure that the platform was the right platform. You got some buy-in by using the Innovation Center. I look at 2021, right, May, that decision was made, right? So we're talking 2021 to 2023. Talk to me a little bit about the deployments and how you guys deployed and the size. I think what's important in this conversation, Connect's been around for a while, obviously. This is one of the largest financial services implementations that have been done. So talk a little bit about the agents and that stuff and how you guys deployed.
Yeah, from a voice standpoint, we took kind of the approach, go all the way back to the innovation lab, right, and think about how we identified some of the lines of business that were more isolated. We built a waved approach to figure out, okay, who within the business both is far enough along within the merger, right? It's the unique circumstance we had to deal with here. Who's far enough along in the merger to be able to carve them off and go, gain momentum on the Connect piece? And then who do we know is going to have the most complexity in terms of call volume, number of agents, the complexity of the calls dealt with? It was the core retail channel. We basically said, let's use the momentum that we've built on the innovation lab side. Let's take that idea and then front load some of those other teams. Again, some of it was forced based on where we were with the merger, but let's take some of those teams that we know are going to grow in scale, grow in complexity, grow in some of the integration work that we had that wasn't necessarily represented in that upfront innovation lab, where we chose some of the more isolated teams. Let's do that in a way that we can build on the learnings themselves. It allows us to move at pace and get agents cut over, which was part of the business case. It allows the client then to take a look and say, okay, I'm repeating this and I'm capable of managing this platform on my own. So there's confidence gain in that, which was, I think, item 3 or 4 on that previous slide. It gains voice of the customer feedback, which was key, right? It enabled us to go sit with a new line of business with feedback from a tangible line of business and say, here are some of the things that we learned in the prior engagement, and word of mouth spreads, right? I mean, the idea that you can build momentum step over step really helped us kind of get in the door and build this out as more of a program. So it was, again, some of our hand was forced with the pace base of the merger, but a lot of it was trying to build on kind of the start slow and accelerate. And once you hit a tipping point, and especially on the messaging side, acceleration really picked up at a rapid pace.
Yeah, it was interesting because almost in contrast, like the messaging deployment was big bang, right? We had generalist reps who handled all interactions. I think the difference with voice is, you had all those different lines of businesses, like north of 30 different lines of business and specialties. And then for messaging, it was a generalist. So we said, okay, well, because of our scale and because of that, we need to do it all at once. And what really helped us be successful there was just shifting left and pulling in the operational leadership into those very beginning conversations. When we made the decision in mid-2022 to say, okay, now we're going to unify this architecture now that we've deployed Lex and we're rolling that out and that's hitting more and more clients, and we said, okay, let's do this architecture, we pulled in the operation right away and kind of got like weekly fireside chats going just to say, hey, what do you want to know about this platform? What are your expectations around it? What are you worried about? And sometimes those meetings were 30 minutes, sometimes those meetings were 3 hours. But by the end of that, knowing that we had a big bang implementation in front of us, we just had months of preparation and alignment because of how much was going to change for them, right? They were going to have a new UI for their reps, their leadership was going to have new reporting that they had to get familiar with, and just the new experience, which is in the messaging channel, the virtual assistant was handling most of the interactions. So they needed to know how that was functioning and operating to train their employees to be ready to pick up the conversation when it got handed off to them.
Awesome. So before I move on, I definitely want to talk about cutover. You did multiple cutovers, right, with agents. What was some of the experience you saw around how the agents reacted? Was there a loss in productivity and that type of stuff?
I mean, on the voice side, that's actually one of the things that I would say I'm probably most proud of on the program. There was an expectation that we would have a degraded experience over a period of time. It was what they experienced in some of the migration activities, just cutting over like for like in the merger. They had built in some expectations, the technology team had built in some expectations on degraded experience with the line of business. We had contingency plans for how to deal with all of that. And frankly, especially in our most complex case for agent cutover, it was almost at parity immediately. It was actually really impressive to see the ease with which the agents were able to pick up the feature functionality that we had introduced, by the way that we had introduced it. And so when you talk about, some of the metrics, some of the key metrics that they were measuring, we saw a lot of consistency right away, and that was one of the things that in the senior leadership levels, they were really starting to celebrate, because there was not that loss of experience in this primary channel with their client base.
Yeah, on the messaging side, we were able to maintain all of our productivity metrics, and on the virtual assistant side, we were improving from what they had initially deployed. What we really saw there was just, again, their chat platform that they were using, they were just very comfortable and familiar with that experience, and we just had to spend a lot of time helping them understand this is what's not going to be worse, but what's going to be different, right? And really helping people understand, like, it's not, you're still going to be just as productive, you're still going to be able to work. And what helped us a lot, and again, we figured this out through our weekly conversations with the operation, is just, hey, we're going to have champions that we train up on this in training environments, so that they can then work with their other employees to kind of, virally share the info of, like, oh, hey, like, you just need to click here and do this. And you just break that muscle memory so that you're able to keep going with your day job.
Yeah, I will tell you, as a quality assurance person, so my responsibility was to be the independent quality assurance person. I heard that every time I interviewed the client. Everyone was very, very concerned about their experience changing. They were very comfortable. They were in love with the tools, right? And many of these agents had been bitten with the bank in some form or fashion for many years, and that was the biggest fear. And then when I came back in after go live, I was pleasantly surprised. I was expecting a backlash, or I was expecting, hey, this is not what I expected, and I think you guys did an amazing job. All right, so let's talk about the architecture, right? I think this is, obviously, the important part, right? I mean, we are building a platform. This isn't just taking a product and implementing it. So, definitely a lot of time went up front to figure out what is the right architecture for the bank. Maybe an intro to the slide, and we'll walk through each part of it here. But, you see the numbers on here. This is kind of how we looked at going from, the legacy IVR system to the omni-channel platform, to the agent, and to the managers and the teammates, right? So the agents themselves. These are the components that we thought about, or the team thought about, as they were building this architecture and the core parts. So let's start a little bit about their legacy system. So I think when you guys implemented, right, when the calls came in, obviously you were still working with multiple systems. How did the legacy IVR play in the architecture?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that went into it. I think the cutover piece on the legacy IVR side was a challenge. We basically had two teams running in parallel trying to figure this out. I mean, it was our Accenture team responsible for building out kind of the future state, while we were also figuring out the integrations and the APIs. A lot of the headwind that we faced in this particular case had to do with the secondary part of it. It wasn't necessarily just the legacy platform itself. It was more about the integration patterns that had been set up on that legacy platform. So the APIs, the data required, the test execution around it, that created unique challenges that we didn't anticipate when we had the higher complexity lines of business, because of the way that there was, it was like a plate of spaghetti trying to navigate through some of the network architecture. Yeah. So it really became difficult in that instance to say who owns the heritage piece of this, and in some cases they were not even there anymore, but who can help us navigate the API structure, and who can help us cut over from today's platform to where we wanted to get to with Connect. I think that and then the data piece itself, actually managing the data from legacy to new, those two I think were probably the biggest barriers for us to gain any more velocity than we had initially.
So before we dig into the voice side, I assume you had to deal with a legacy IVR because it wasn't a big bang cutover, right? Correct. So you were doing routing. You maybe come into the legacy IVR, and because of whatever I picked, you might be going to a new part that had already been cut over. In some cases, you may stay in the legacy IVR.
That's correct.
On the mobile side, or sorry, I should say on the chat side, Let's talk a little bit about that first part around what that API gateway and what role. It played a very significant role.
Yeah, and that was where, again, when it came to coming together and solutioning this and architecting it out, with the financial services space, just compliance and regulation and authentication and identification, like getting all that right digitally is super important and also at the same time complicated. And so it was just a credit to our team and AWS who jointly came together and just really attacked that problem in terms of how are we going to architect this, how are we going to leverage the right pieces of services and solutions out of AWS in order to fulfill those requirements, satisfy enterprise architecture and cybersecurity so they could sign off on that. And that was where using AWS's API gateway was crucial because we had 3 digital channels we wanted to serve all consistently, right? We want to make sure it was all text-based, so you got the same experience. So we had iOS, Android, and the web. And then when they would all hit the same API to start a chat, and that was where then the Lambdas flew, right? Like we had built ones to go out and make sure that the authentication was correct because we wanted it to be seamless so that when you were in the app or online, you didn't have to do anything else. You would just connect and you would be authenticated so that we could do some more involved transacting with the virtual assistant. The other thing that was really important too in there was the pulling up all the transcripts from the prior interactions you had. We wanted to make sure that we were able to go back in months to pull conversations and present it to the customer as if they had never, from where they left off. So they could open the chat and see that, oh, the last time I talked to them was 3 months ago when I asked them about a loan or something like that. So we had Lambdas going out, pulling the chat transcripts out of Connect to then present that and help some continuity with the service experience. And then finally, too, the other important thing was session persistence. So being able to give the customer the ability to close the app or they walk away from the computer and they go idle and things time out. Well, we didn't want the chat to just refresh just because you logged out or something like that. So if you're on the website and the web page logged out, when you log back in, we had it to where the chat would pop back up and would pick up where you left off and had the intelligence too to say, you know what, do we need to put them back at the top of the main menu of the virtual assistant, or do we just keep the conversation going so that they could, because we all have life, things happen, and you don't want to have to start everything over. So that was part of the experience that the API gateway really helped drive and was just a crucial part of the architecture, especially from the virtual assistant and chat perspective.
Yeah, I like what you said around using the core Amazon API gateway and building off of it. Right, I think that's one of the great features of AWS, right? Because you can call Lambdas and pretty much do anything you want.
Right.
Right, and take a service and not just use it as is or a third-party service. You're able to extend it and solve a lot of those technical problems. So I think now let's talk a little bit about Amazon, the VPC, right? So obviously lots of Amazon products here. I think we could have 5 slides on just what goes on in that VPC. But there are a couple things that I really thought a lot about and questioned a lot as I was reviewing the program was, the choice to use US East to start with, right? Can you talk a little bit about that, or about, the decision, and also some of the redundancy and stuff that was created, in some cases not created for certain reasons?
Right, I think the big thing was picking from a business continuity perspective, right? And just the fact of moving to the cloud was going to give them resiliency that they were having to really architect and structure for on their legacy platforms. So there was hey, we're going to go to the cloud and we're going to go up into US East, and then the question is well, do we go further, right? And because there's a cost associated with that, and it's a big question in the banking space is do we really try to go for that super high availability? And I think the decision was, hey, we're in US East, and it's got built-in redundancies, intra-regional redundancies. Let's roll with that. And so that was where we were able to, we kind of had that as the plan, and their uptime has been really good so far.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like, so I thought it was interesting, and I really challenge here because in like my experiences, right, you're building this, you want multi-region, you want that super redundancy as close to no downtime as possible. And I thought, the bank did a really good job of doing the cost analysis, right, and looking at the risk. And obviously, I won't say it's been perfect, right? There's been, some challenges with the UACs, but, the improvement that they saw over their platform today was tremendous.
Yes.
I think that was the big reason I saw that they didn't kind of extend that thing. Anything else you guys want to highlight in the VPC and kind of what went on in the Amazon world? Obviously, Connect is at the core of this. But you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple things to point out. The first is that this is, especially when it came to the voice and messaging side, for the retail side of things, it's all the same instance. And that's a crucial architecture piece because it keeps, number one, it keeps a lot of things consistent, and number two, it helps in terms of scalability and the ability to have omni-channel reps, which is something that they're looking to do. Right now, they're separate with voice and chat, but they're now sitting on a platform that if they really wanted to tomorrow, they could all be one. So that was a big piece of that, and we worked through that a lot when we were re-architecting. It's like, do we have our own instances or do we keep them together? And we as Accenture and AWS were stressing like, hey, one instance of Connect is a great leading practice. Like we should really strive for that. I think the other piece of that too is that Connect. There's always the question of like, which comes first, Connect or Lex? And in this case, we did Connect because it costs a little more, but like a buy transaction, it's not much more, but it was worth it for all the reporting and insights and things you were able to deploy and helped really light up the Connect reporting so that it was more effective and you had better insights into the Lex and that sort of thing. You still have to build stuff to pull out the information from Lex, but it's easier than if it was sitting out front.
Awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit about, okay, you're in the VPC, all right, you're doing all the stuff. Now you got to come back in the corporate network, right? Mm-hmm. Your agents and things like that. So I think first of all, let's talk about the additional project, Acquion for Dialer and Variant for workforce management. Talk a little bit about why they picked those and, decided to use a third-party product versus, rebuilding that stuff or using.
Yeah, with Variant, it was a bit of familiarity. Like that's the product they had. And they were like, at the time, especially with the workforce management functionalities in Connect, they're like, we'd like to keep Variant. That's fine. Like the connections are well known, integration is straightforward. It's just you now need to deploy a team to go configure everything in Variant. So we worked with that team to make sure that we just had the integrations built, and then we're and they had what they needed to get all those configurations put together. Because that was just recognizing and respecting the work that has to go into that. You're building all these skills and queues that need to be managed in Connect. It needs to be managed in Variant as well.
Yeah, I think obviously when this started, right, some of the features weren't in Connect.
Right.
It'd be interesting today. Well, I know I see other clients are going through that, maybe making different decisions now around the dialer.
That's a conversation they're having. I mean, they're already having that. I think there's recognition. I think Andrew said it well. There was comfortability with some of the choices that were made when we started, but with the evolution of what's available in Connect, I think that's absolutely on the table.
So CRM, right? Obviously CRM, big part of this. They were putting in Salesforce at the same time. They had legacy, so you had to cross two different CRMs.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about how you did that.
And the Salesforce piece is nuanced because it's just gaining traction in the contact center space for this particular client. So we still treat that almost as an isolated lab, showing them some of the capabilities that exist. They have chosen actually to start with the more complex agent base on the CRM platform because they feel like it's going to give them the biggest bang for their buck. But they're now challenged in the speed with which they can roll it out. So we find ourselves in a position where we need to continue to kind of demonstrate the integration between Amazon and Salesforce, which in their environment had some initial challenges that I think we've largely overcome. But there is a lot of connective tissue that you have to figure out between those two that we've seen kind of bear out. And so almost history repeating itself here. We're doing some of the proof of concept work on the CRM side. And then their legacy CRM was a homegrown system that they had been using. That was a separate integration effort altogether. But the North Star here is to have the voice and messaging channel powered by AWS. Their CRM platform will be within or based in Salesforce. And so that journey is one that we're helping not only kind of mobilize for them, but then also, again, kind of think through on that from a complexity standpoint.
I thought the one interesting thing, because of the legacy, because they didn't have the CRM platform, we used an accelerator from Accenture to help with that desktop agent. You want to talk a little bit about that?
For the messaging side?
More on the call center stuff, so the CC stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The name is right. Yeah, so there's also we've got UAP, which can be deployed really quickly in order to just bring all that in. I think the great thing about that is it comes in with a very clear experience, right? Like here's how you can handle chats and calls and all the customer information in there. We've got, agent assist functionality that comes right out of the box. And then the nice thing about it too is that it plugs really nicely into all the case management of Salesforce. Yeah. So being able to reach out and do that without having to deploy Salesforce to that particular person. So having that interface that we can deploy, and I've certainly been talking to them about using that as well.
Yeah, I think in this case, the customer wasn't fully on Salesforce yet, right? Connect didn't have the robust call center agent desktop that they wanted. Accenture has a unified agent portal. We were able to use that, all kind of portal, or so all widget based and things like that. It was able, as they were building a product, it was just one less thing they had to worry about and could leverage to bring it to life.
I think it's so much. I mean, think about that timeline side. There's just so much change happening in this organization. It's not unique to them, right? I mean, when you look at the massive amount of change, picking the right accelerators and capabilities to minimize that, both from a technology and integration standpoint, but also the ease with which you can put that into the end user's hands. That's actually for UAP where we really got a lot of traction too, was for the line of business to just say, it's not one more thing that we have to sit in requirement sessions and go build. It's something that we can just mobilize immediately.
Yeah. Awesome. So obviously a very unique architecture, right? We can go on and we can answer questions you have about the architecture. But I think what also is very unique about the story is the scale, right? Obviously, one of the reasons I picked AWS was for scale. So can you talk a little bit about the size now, that this thing's running at?
Yeah, there's a total of, so on the voice side, we've got a total of 10,000 agents. You can see there's 60 odd lines of business that we've mobilized. So it was robust, and again, that 10,000 agents has been that growing trajectory that I've been talking about for the last 37 minutes. But I think those two things in conjunction were why they ended up going with AWS specifically. They felt more comfortable handling that scale with AWS, proven correctly. You can see then some of the other things on the left-hand side there. We talked a little bit before about what we accomplished here. Like this is the pat the teams back slide a little bit, but the 25 self-service journeys was key, right? That was brand new for them. The virtual assistant that Andrew has been talking about, and then I mentioned it, and I think it's worth mentioning again, right? Containment and parity at go live was critical. I mean, it was unexpected, and it was highly celebrated in this case. And then we had no major productivity or production issues at go live either. So again, in the case where you have so much change, the disruptive nature of change with both a merger and a migration like this, to be able to hang your hat on some of those things was critically important for us.
Yeah, and for the chat and virtual assistant, it was just, they've got now a very sophisticated Lex-powered virtual assistant, and it's front-ending all of the chat interactions, right? 150 plus interactions, 1,000 utterances that we're going through and continue to refine, and it's deployed to all their customers across mobile and web. And I think the big thing too was just recently the dial got turned on exposure and the number of interactions supported, because for a good part of the year it was kind of, the release of the virtual assistant was kind of on like the help and support page. It wasn't front and center on like the mobile homepage or the when you log into the online bank, and now it is. And that jumped the interactions an order of magnitude, and it was, we were expecting a little bit of like, okay, here comes the additional volume coming into the operation, and actually we didn't see that. It ticked up a little. What we actually saw tick up a lot was the interaction with the virtual assistant, as well as the containment for that went up as well, because now people were getting more comfortable using it, and then now they have a lot more data to help them have really good decision making on refining the virtual assistant and what it's currently serving today, and how to move forward to provide a better service experience for tomorrow. Awesome.
I think one of the services, Amazon services, we didn't talk about in the previous slide, but it's mentioned here is contact lens. I definitely saw contact lens play a pretty big role. So can you talk a little bit about that for the audience?
Yeah, I know for the messaging operation, they were really excited about it, because what was really originally available on their old platform in terms of analytics to a select few that had the associated licenses, now everybody had access to it from like an operations perspective. So people were just using that in their day-to-day. Now you had supervisors and team leads that were going in and analyzing, specific interactions for their reps, and then also being able to, hey, I had a bad interaction, and all the leader had to do was like go in and type in a little bit about the interaction, and it'd pull right up. So it helped from just a day-to-day analytics, and then also from a coaching and improvement perspective, that they could look at the sentiment analysis and be like, well, you know what, I need to investigate the ones that are negative, or that had words in there we didn't like to hear, even if it was like complaint related, or if it was just things that they knew they wanted coaching around. Contact Lens brought you right to those interactions, rather than the old school style of like, well, I'm just going to sample 4 interactions per month per rep, and I hope I get meaningful ones. Yeah. So that was a big improvement for them.
I'm going to quickly just talk about this. We talked about throughout. I think for Accenture, where we helped, great partnership with AWS and the bank itself. It was definitely a 3-way partnership. We started with the strategy and governance, as you kind of talked about, the solution architecture, and coming up with that picture, right? I know the picture looked pretty simple, right? But a lot of work went into solutioning and that, getting the architecture right, thinking about it from a platform. The bank, I don't think, had really run a platform. Yes, they'd had legacy systems, but I see that a lot with customers because they just expect the call center thing to come out of the box. The experience-led design, I thought, was a great thing. Platform development, obviously we provided engineers and help building that, and then go live support, right? That transition and taking them through that. So learnings, right? We're here, a couple slides left, and we'll get into questions, but give me a couple learnings from each one of you guys.
To me, crystallizing the program and moving from innovation lab to full migration, that was one of them, right? And that kind of hits on all 4 of these pieces, but the change here is manageable. You saw that in some of the metrics that we demonstrated, right? There was parity at production, and there were no major outages, but it's still disruptive to individual agents, right? It's still disruptive to the folks that have been grown accustomed to the platform that they had. So one of the things that we really had to not only shift our own mindset on, but really work collectively among the 3 teams you talked about, among Accenture, the client, and AWS, was how are we making sure that we turn this into the robust program that appreciates the change that we're introducing in the environment? And then how do we do that in a way that excites that audience, right? That helps them understand the power that we're offering to them in this new platform, versus just saying, man, I don't need one more change, I just want to stay on what I had before. So I think gaining the momentum in the way that we actually ran the program, getting some of that voice of the customer and sharing that out, which that was not immediate, right? You can sit up here and say, oh yeah, great idea, but it was not obvious to us at the time. Building that type of repeatable and vocal support, that was the groundswell that kind of got us, I think, really going at the right velocity.
So here you had a really solid plan, right? Obviously, you're dealing with a merger, picking which ones you go, right? Timeline. I think you guys were very agile in that plan as well. Yeah. It wasn't, hey, set it and it was done, right? Changes happened, mergers got delayed, things got delayed. Right. You talked about, very strong change management, building momentum. Talk about the dedicated resources. Like this is one of the things I see most of our customers suffer with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets to just the nature of a contact center implementation is like open heart surgery, right? You've got technology, you've got the operations, you have customers involved. Like it's just every aspect of this is touched. Whereas it's not like a typical technology implementation where we come in, we deploy the technology, here's how you use it, and you move on, right? And just being able to have a dedicated transformation management team to say, hey, you guys are the nexus for all the planning, for where people need to know to go to if they have questions, and helping like facilitate forums to have technology and business and design people all coming together who normally don't too, right? Usually it's like, technology is just providing, services to the operations, and then operations does their own thing. But since it's so disruptive, you've just got to have that formal and structured team there to help with the migration and carry that through.
Yeah, and I think we've already talked heavily about the technology. Obviously, using Amazon, very extendable, having all the different services to build around, being able to build off the gateway. We talked about using the UAP as an accelerator and that type of stuff. So, a couple best practices. I assume many of you are in this room because you're either going through a call center transformation, or you're getting ready to do one. Just real quickly, a few of the best practices.
I mean, I'll say overarching in a conversation that we had in this case a number of times is this is not a one-size-fits-all, right? I mean, I think a lot of clients look at this as kind of a single-threaded approach, and what we tried to ground on in this case is that even line of business to line of business, there's the opportunity to optimize, right? Which is, we're never going to recommend just a lift and shift, right? At least in the case of migrating from the on-prem to the power that you're introducing with Connect. But at least look at the optimized channel, which is where you get velocity, but also pace that enables you to learn, versus full transformation, which some clients are more interested in doing this large-scale transformation. Some are more interested in the optimized channel. Either way, you end up in that enhancement bucket too, Chris, which is really to say, here's how I've set myself up for repeatable and sustainable innovation. I don't know what you'd add to that.
Yeah, well, and the important thing too is distinguishing the channel that you're really transforming too, right? So like with voice, it's that we're seeing a lot of people have success in the optimized piece, right, where it's like, because again, it's a very large scale. There's a lot of legacy designs and technology involved that just reconciling that and bringing it together and pushing to the cloud, there's a lot of benefit. But then on the other side too, where you look at the more digital channels like chat, that can be more transformative because they're already, those channels are ready to adopt that and have that transformation and then be able to act on it more quickly too. So it's, like you said, not one size fits all, and even then just recognizing like which aspect of this migration and the channels you're touching, like what's going to be the best for them. Where some groups are just, hey, we just need to pull you in and make some improvements, and we'll come back to you for transformation. And others, they're ready for it, and we can take them, to the cutting edge right away.
Yeah, I agree. The one size fits all is not what I see. I think each customer has to think about where they want to be in this journey, right? Is it really starting out with optimization, using a platform to optimize on, but pretty much keeping things the same way, or is it truly part of a transformation that you're trying to make within your business? And I think the point is really good around think about the methods, right? Chat versus versus voice. I'd say the biggest thing, best practices, is I think about Connect as a platform. Or it's not just Connect. And I always tell my clients that. They go, we're using Amazon Connect. Well, you're not just using Amazon Connect. There's about 10 things that go into this, right? Think about it. It's your platform, right? This isn't Avaya versus Connect. This is you're building your customer engagement platform, and you need to treat it like a platform, build it like a platform, be agile, add features, that type of stuff. Treat it as a service versus just thing. So I think with that, we got about 10 minutes or so left. Questions. Anything we can answer.